Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. We have a department in the university, we have many of them actually, but we have one that is geared to people actually older than I am. Or am I on my way?
Well, I hope you do.
My guest today is Dr. James A. Thorson. He is head of the Department of Gerontology in the College of Public Affairs and Community Service. Did I get that right?
Exactly.
And at UNO, which is probably one of the more interesting groupings of departments because they are so geared to people in this state and helping us find our way.
Well, yeah, we have the School of Social Work, the School of Public Administration, and the Department of Criminal Justice, as well as Gerontology and the Goodrich program, and the Center for Applied Urban Research, just to round it out.
Yes.
And it is an interesting college.
It is. Yeah. But what your particular interest is those who are aging and those of us even who may be in the process and those who may be that aren't in the process.
Well, there's a good future in gerontology. Actually, I teach a course on death and dying just to cover all beds, but and that's quite an undertaking. Oh, go ahead.
How many puns? How many puns?
Yeah, we're very down to earth. Anyway, the future of gerontology is good. We can see a boom of the demographics really beginning now. Usually we define aging as starting at 65. It's kind of an arcane reason. We used to say that you get your full Social Security benefits at 65. Actually, they got it from Otto von Bismarck, who started to pension off civil servants in Germany in 1884, and he had enough money to pay people 65 and above. So we're stuck with that definition. But the generation that's 65 plus is the fastest growing, and within that group, the people 85 plus are the very fastest growing portion of our population.
Now, you have recently finished, your department has some research that shows kind of a thing that makes us happy in this state is that family values still exist and those that are able still take care of the frail elderly members of their family. I have a feeling, though, that's going to change, and we might talk about that. But that's really good news for this state in terms of resources.
Well, Nebraskans are big on family values, and over and over and again, in our survey of caregiving in Nebraska, we found that when people have children or spouses or surviving siblings, they can count on family to take care of them to a remarkable degree. Over 70% of the people out of the 1,000 interviews we did have a close family member within a half an hour's drive. Over 80% have a family member within an hour's drive. Over 20% have a family member within walking distance. And over and over again, when we ask people, who do you turn to in times of trouble, it's a family member. Then we interviewed family members who are caregivers. Of the 1,000 people we interviewed, 27%, about 271, are actively caring for a frail elder, and over 50% have cared for a frail elder at some time. And we asked them, well, what did you get for this? And they said things like, I got thanks. I got self-satisfaction. I got a sense that I was doing my duty. I didn't look for any reward. It was my dad or my spouse or my sister-in-law or whoever it was. We found that neighbors take care of neighbors. Of the people who were getting care, 52% were getting cared for by a spouse, 48% by a daughter, 38% were being cared for by a neighbor. Now, my students were surprised to hear about this, but neighbors take care of each other in Nebraska. This is a good state to live in.
The one thing, though, things might be different in some other states or certainly big chunks of other states, but we are going to face some demographic shifts that not only include more people getting older, as in the baby boomers, but the demographics of their era in terms of number of children, how their children moved?
Well, that's
around?
the problem. Now, the current generation of people 65 and above is unusually small because the birth rate went down during the Depression.
Right. You didn't have
Well-
as many because you couldn't afford as many.
Exactly, but all bets were off with the baby boomers. And the baby boomers are getting older, as we all know. So we've got two demographic trends. One is a rapidly increasing number and percentage of older people. And then the birth control pill came out in 1960, and safe and reliable birth control meant smaller families. And I think that I can recall back to the 70s, I'm an older person myself now, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. The idea of looking after the earth's resources was important to a lot of us who limited our families to only 2 children. It became unfashionable to have 4, 5, 6 children. Well, if you take a look at who takes care of the elderly, and you see that there are fewer and fewer children in the future, you wonder, well, who's going to take their place? And that's the demographic rub that we're looking at in the next decade, or certainly within the next 2 decades. A lot of older people and not very many caregivers.
And their children were more mobile in terms of how far they moved from home, too.
You know, a lot of times older people will move to follow at least one of those children. And if there are more than one child, there's usually some tension as to who is the caregiver. It usually emerges that it's the oldest daughter. But say there is no older daughter. Or in my family, the oldest daughter was a flake. And my mother wanted nothing to do with being cared for by my sister. And I can see why. So I was the person who was honored by having Mom for 14 years.
Most of the people I know who have given care to a spouse who was either very ill for a while or just going through that last phase of life were very glad to do it, but they weren't sometimes didn't have the resources, both in terms of money or in terms of energy.
Imagine yourself taking care of an 82-year-old person with Alzheimer's, who gets up and wanders in the night, may have personality changes, forgets to say thank you, forgets you. It can be a living hell for people. One of the great programs that the Alzheimer's Association and the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging sponsor are things like services to help people who are caregivers to extend their ability to keep their loved one at home. Few of us look forward to going to a nursing home. And of course, the whole idea of services is to be service extenders to the family. When the family looks like it's going to run out of rope or get to the end of their rope, give them some more rope. Have a respite volunteer to come in and take care of Dad for 4 hours so Mom can get some sleep or go shopping or go get her hair done.
Or just get the groceries. Sometimes you can't even do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-boggling to think about caring for somebody for 24 hours a day.
We went through a period where when we started to see more cases of Alzheimer's and a number of things happened where we wanted to do something besides send an elder to a nursing home because they weren't maybe that bad, or we didn't have the resources, and we really didn't have nursing home insurance and some of those things, and we had to go through a shift in terms of how organizations could find new ways to help them without just putting someone away because the older person, in the case of like a spouse, couldn't handle it. We're giving them some help, and that took a while to get to that through that.
Well, there are all
shift.
sorts of innovative things. Now they have day services, daycare centers for older people, where, say for example, your mom works, you work and you need to take care of Mom too. Well, you can drop her off at the day center and pick her up on your way home from work. And it's a wonderful alternative to nursing home care. Now, nursing home care, I'm glad it's there, and I used to work in a nursing home I have nothing against them, but they are tremendously expensive. The range in Nebraska is from $3,000 to $6,000 a month. In fact, I know of one instance where a person's on a ventilator and it's $10,000 a month. Now, that's not chicken feed, and few families have the resources to come up with those kinds of dollars. So the longer we can keep people at home, the more we save in terms of personal dollars, governmental expenditures, and the psychological well-being of the people who would rather stay at home anyway. And let's face it, people who are getting confused or demented are used to home. They know where the bathroom is, they know where the kitchen is, they know where the steps are. Put them in a new environment and they have a hard time adapting.
Well, they're less agitated when they have to stay at home, and depression can become an issue to exacerbate the problem with dementia. I mean, it can, what's left up there can actually still get depressed.
You sound like you've been taking gerontology courses.
I read the stuff you guys put out.
Well, wonderful.
So we are looking at a group of baby boomers going into that era of their life where some of them will need help from relatives or whatever. What, in terms of public policy, because there won't be maybe quite as many relatives available nearby to care for them, given...
Well, there's a bit of a controversy over that. We can see that these people are getting old, and we've done everything that we possibly can in terms of public health and medical measures to keep people older, growing older, and in fact have been tremendously successful at extending the number of people who live out their allotted time, if you will. Well, that gets to a public policy problem then. One thing, of course, is that the Social Security program, which is in fact overfunded now because of the large group of baby boomers paying into it, will at a certain time in the future start to run out of money, because we can see that there are fewer people who will pay into it in future years and more people who will receive benefits. That's even more true of Medicare, which is the medical program associated with Social Security. We have people in nursing homes in Nebraska now. About 52% of the costs of nursing home care are paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid is a welfare category, and it's medical reimbursement for the medically indigent. You don't have to be old, but many older people become poor. Now that's an interesting thing. In our society, we don't think about becoming poor. Most people who are in poverty were born that way. But older people can, in fact, go into long-term care and spend down their assets to a point where Medicaid has to take over because there's no more private funding.
Well, the thing that occurs to me, and maybe I'm way off base, is because that does often happen. You can start out thinking you have a good amount of retirement, you travel a little, one spouse gets really sick, then it's your turn, and by that you spend some time in a nursing home and the money's all gone. So from a public policy point of view, are we preparing, both in terms of how we're going to come up with the money, but in terms of will there be enough facilities that are good and legitimate facilities? Because even now, as I understand it, and may change from day to day, there aren't necessarily at any given time enough placement places. Some days there might be, but there are some days where there aren't, especially in some parts of Nebraska.
What the problem is that there are not enough Medicaid beds. Consider yourself an owner of a nursing home. Do you want to take a person who's a private pay individual who pays more, or do you want to take a person who has no money and the government is paying for them, and the government's not paying you a reimbursement rate that it equals what you'd get for a private pay patient? In other words, we've got two different classes, just like on an airliner, and the people in economy class don't necessarily have the resources to pay their own way. Well, every nursing home wants to stay in business, and the more private pay patients you have, the likelier you are to stay in business. Well, this gets to be a bit of a problem. I have former students who are hospital discharged social workers now telling me that at any one time in a city the size of Omaha, there are only 1 or 2 Medicaid beds to discharge older persons from the hospital into. Well, now that's a bit of a problem. On the other hand, only 82% of the nursing home beds in the state are occupied at any one time.
Well, the marketplace may take over in terms of would they rather have the beds filled and somebody paying something,
Yeah.
given if they have to hire a certain amount of staff. I mean, your laws of how you staff bear into that.
Right.
But still, different parts of the state may not have beds available. We may not have enough Medicaid beds here because sometimes they'll allot just a couple, if any.
Exactly. One of the alternatives that we have not pursued in Nebraska nearly so much as has been the case in other states, Missouri is a good example, is something called a Medicaid waiver. And that would be where you can take the money that would have gone into paying for a Medicaid nursing home bed and purchase services to keep the person in their own home. Well, that's immediately cheaper because you don't have to pay for the heat, lights, the building itself, and probably the food, because they were paying for that already. And it's buying a visiting nurse, a home health aide, a physical therapist, visiting services that are brought into the home, and it keeps the person not only happier, healthier, but more independent, and it costs less. Well, this gets to be a bit of a problem. I did a study back in 1985 where I projected the dollars that would go into long-term care Medicaid expenditures from the state budget. Now, this is a program where 60% is paid for by the federal government and 40% is paid for by the state. It's a significant portion of our state budget, and the more it grows, the less there is for other parts of the state, including the university, to receive. That, in fact, explains the fiscal problem that many of our state agencies and campuses have had, is the growth of long-term care Medicaid. Well, I did the report in 1985, and I projected by the end of that century, in that 15-year span, the expenditures would triple.
Were you right on?
I was wrong.
It was worse.
I explained to the legislative chairs at a meeting we had last summer that they did not triple, they quadrupled. Poor Senator Brashear looked like he'd swallowed a bad oyster when he heard this. And that's because the growth was small. We had inflation, of course, in those years and increasing medical expenses. But the population itself was rather flat because the people who got old in the 90s were the people who were born in Depression years. All bets are off after 2010.
So what, in terms of public policy, so maybe we learn to stretch those dollars by, with visiting nurses and all kinds of permutations and combinations on that model. My fear is that there isn't, even if we had the facilities and maybe even if we had the money, which is going to be tough, we may not have, every state's going to be going through this, staff. I mean, there is a lot of facets to this.
My hunch is that if money is provided, the staff will be provided too.
They will come.
Well, we have more students than we can shake a stick at in gerontology. Right now, we've got about 860 registrants. That's not majors, but
much of the staff
registered.
Involved isn't the people that graduate from your
I know,
program.
we have a nursing shortage that is not going to quit.
And even the sub-nursing categories, you know, the
Exactly.
helper. I mean, when my grandmother was in a nursing home, they were even, and it was a nice nursing home, were having trouble finding that, just the people that do the day-to-day things for the elderly people or help them.
And they often have a hard time hiring enough staff. My wife just recently retired from Douglas County Health Center, and she's always been groaning about there are 30 people down, 40 people down. They can't fill the positions that they have.
So what are we going to look for in that regard? How are we going to stay, because I'll bet you that the dollars will start getting competitive between states for various kinds of personnel.
One of the committees of the legislature recently hired a consultant from another state, and he came and did interviewing with people like myself, And his report said that the people of Nebraska should be more responsible and save their money and buy nursing home insurance so that they would not become wards of the state in the future.
Well, Dave Landis, head of the Revenue Committee, came on this show last year. We were just talking about spending, and he just said, I would advise all my friends that can afford it to get nursing home insurance.
Well,
But
he didn't point out that of the states, Nebraska is the fourth from the bottom in terms of Medicaid expenditures for long-term care. I mean, people in Nebraska have been saving their money and trying to be responsible. It's just an overwhelming expense. Who can afford $6,000 a month? Just an absolutely crushing expense. Now, on the other hand, we talk to people about their planning for retirement, and they'll say, you know, I'm getting up to be 50, I should save some money for my retirement. I think, oh my goodness, you know, about a third of the U.S. population has no savings for retirement. And we know that Social Security isn't enough to take care of them.
it won't even pay your drug bills.
Oh, that's another issue.
Well, we can go there later, but we are facing a situation where, as good as our relatives are in wanting to help take care of us, they will not be there physically, geographically, or even have the financial resources.
I just
to do
advised
help.
my dentist assistant about an hour ago to have children early and often. That's one of the solutions. Well, why do you suppose there's such a high birth rate in countries like India and China?
Well, the theory has always been, that someone takes care
They have to have somebody
of.
to take care of the
Right.
folks. Yeah. And in at least in China, when I went there were posters, billboards up that said, "It's best to have only one, even if it's only a girl." Well, my students hoot when I tell them that, but the idea is that if you have a girl, she'll marry some boy and then move off and take care of his parents. So you better have a boy baby. Well, that's led to a real demographic problem that's worse than ours.
Yeah, they don't have enough women to marry the young boys.
Well,
But anyway,
they're aborting young girls. There are only 700
that's been
girls
going
born
on.
to every 1,000 boys in parts of China. Not a really good thing for their future. So, well, it's not come to any kind of crisis like that, and in the United States, and I believe that the birth rate, in fact, has been showing some signs of
Yes,
increasing.
it has. Well, culturally, because of the increased influx of the Hispanic population, they tend to have more. Plus, those on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale tend to have more children. I don't know how that holds up as well as it used to, but I think there's still something there.
So we could take some satisfaction that if we have more poor people, they'll have lots of babies.
No. We'll get into the whole economics of that, of jobs aren't paying as much, and we could go on and on forever. But what would you, if you had suggestions to make to the policymakers in this state? I'm sure you tell people to save as much money as early as they can, but for
Well,
policymakers.
yes, and the policymakers could go out and give good advice and tell people, be responsible for your own care. People will, as long as they can.
But in terms of models for the future, or looking ahead, because we can't wait. When this descends, it is going to descend with some pretty heavy footsteps on our society here.
One thing is that people who run on the fact that they will cut your taxes are pulling the wool over the voters' eyes. The taxes will have to go up. There's no way around it. The amount that goes into Social Security, the 6.45% that we pay now, either will have to be increased or the employer's share will have to be increased. The proportion that goes to Medicare will have to be increased. The dollars that go into Medicaid long-term care will have to be increased, and that's on a formula basis that happens whether we like it or not. So it either is appropriated or it increases the federal deficit.
That's just a numbers game. I mean, we're going to have to come up with more dollars because of the number of people.
No doubt about it. Plus, we're going to have to give incentives for people to go to nursing school, which I think we're going to have to give incentives for physicians to study geriatrics. In fact, our own medical school at UNMC has a geriatrics division, which
Very good
makes
one.
it unusual among
So it's one of the
medical
first
schools.
in this area.
And in partnership with my department, we have secured a geriatric education center grant to do exactly that, encourage health professionals to go into gerontology and geriatrics. But all of these are just stopgaps. Basically, families are going to have to continue to look out for their own. Now, if you don't have children, I would start being really good to my nieces and nephews. Seriously.
No, that has crossed my mind. Has crossed my mind.
Dr. Chena Crisara, who was our head of vocal music at UNO until last year, is a woman who's just turned 50 and has no children, and she moved back to Texas for exactly that reason, to be close to her family. She told me, she's been back to visit, that it was the right thing to do.
Well, you can't just expect, when you're not investing in your nieces and nephews' lives, you can't expect them to turn around and help you. From a
Precisely.
from a state perspective, what do our state lawmakers have to? I mean, they've got their hands full with mental health, cuts in university funding, cuts in everything.
Well, one of the things we can count on is that the legislators will get old. And it's
not with term limits, maybe. Maybe we'll just have young ones.
Okay. Well, that maybe will shorten the learning curve. We'll have to have even brighter senators from now on so that they can pick up on what the old ones already knew. What I think is going to happen is that we will have to redouble our efforts with the Medicaid waiver program. It's the only out that I can see. We just really are spending a very little in proportion to other states in buying services with Medicaid waiver dollars. And it's a much less expensive way to do it, to deliver the services at home, than deliver the services in a nursing home.
Okay, we've run out of time, but the idea was not to make people depressed about what's coming ahead, but make them as taxpayers and voters aware that some of these things, to one degree or another, are inevitable. Thank you so much, Dr. James Thorson, head of the Gerontology Department at University of Nebraska in Omaha. And thank you for joining us this week on Consider This. See you next week.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.